It started with a whisper, a name that cut deeper than any knife. Freak. It slithered through the quiet afternoon air, landing on Elara with the weight of 1,000 stones. She was cornered against the brick wall of a quiet suburban street, the sun casting long, accusing shadows. Three of them, Chad, the golden boy athlete, Tiffany, his razor-tongued girlfriend, and Mark, the hulking follower, had her surrounded. Elara's shoulders were hunched, her chin tucked to her chest. A worn canvas backpack clutched to her body like a shield. Her knuckles were white. She was trying to make herself small to disappear into the rough, cold brick. But there was nowhere to go. This was the moment her life was supposed to shatter. But it wasn't. It was the moment theirs did. To understand the earthquake, you first have to see the stillness. Elara lived in the small, unassuming town of Cedar Brook, a place where everyone knew everyone, and anonymity was a foreign concept. She was the new girl, but had long worn off. She'd been there for 6 months, and in that time, she had become a ghost, a fixture people saw but never truly saw. She worked as a low-level clerk at the town's dusty public library, her days a quiet rhythm of sorting books, stamping due dates, and speaking in hushed, polite tones. She wore thrift store sweaters and faded jeans. She brought a simple brown bag lunch to work every day. She lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment above Mr. Henderson's garage. She was, by all outward appearances, painfully ordinary. And in a town like Cedar Brook, and to people like Chad and Tiffany, ordinary was a sin. It was a blank canvas upon which they could project their own cruelty. The bullying didn't start all at once. It began with subtle sneers in the grocery store. Then it was accidentally, bumping into her on the sidewalk, sending her bag of groceries tumbling. Then it was the whispers, loud enough for her to hear. Library mouse. Weirdo. What's wrong with her? They fed on her reaction, on the way her eyes would dart away, the flush of humiliation that would creep up her neck, the way she would quicken her pace to escape. Her fear was their fuel. Today was different. Today they weren't satisfied with whispers. They had followed her from the library, their laughter a predatory echo behind her as she took her usual shortcut home down Maple Street. The street was quiet, lined with oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns. A few people were out. A man watering his flowers, a woman getting into her car. They saw what was happening. They saw the 3 popular kids circling the quiet librarian, and one by one they looked away. The man focused intently on his petunias. The woman suddenly found something fascinating on her car floor. The social contract of Cedar Brook. Don't get involved. Where are you rushing off to, Elara? Tiffany's voice was like shattered glass, sweet and deadly. Big plans? Hot date with a dictionary? Chad chuckled, a low grating sound. He stepped closer, invading her space. He was all polished teeth and Letterman jacket, a king in his tiny domain. Come on, Tiff, be nice. Maybe she's going to read How to Make Friends for Dummies. Again, Elara didn't look up. She focused on a crack in the pavement, on a struggling dandelion pushing through. Don't engage, just don't engage. They'll get bored. They always get bored. Mark, a mountain of muscle and silent compliance, moved to block her path to the left. She was completely surrounded. The air grew thick, heavy with their mockery and her silent dread. Look at me when I'm talking to you, Chad said, his voice dropping its playful edge. It was a command. Slowly Elara lifted her head. Her eyes, a startling shade of gray, were wide with fear. But if you looked closely, past the sheen of unshaded tears, past the tremor in her lip, you would see it. A spark. A tiny, defiant ember burning in the depths. It wasn't the fear of a victim about to break. It was the patience of a predator waiting to strike. Tiffany saw the tears and misread them entirely. She smirked. Ow, is the little mouse gonna cry? Does reality hurt your book-loving little feelings? You know, Chad said, leaning in so close she could smell his cheap cologne. People like you just don't get it. You think you're better than us because you have your nose in a book all day. You're nothing. You're a nobody. You will always be a nobody. He reached out and flicked the strap of her backpack. It was a small, dismissive gesture, but it was the final one. The zipper gave way and the contents of her bag spilled onto the sidewalk with a clatter. Not just books, a sleek, silver laptop, its case now scratched, a small leather-bound journal, and a single old black and white photograph of a severe-looking woman in an elegant gown. For a moment, there was silence. The bullies stared at the spilled contents, their cruelty momentarily paused by the mundane reality of her possessions. Then Chad laughed, picking up the photograph. Who's this? Your great-grandma. She looks like a stiff wind would knock her over. And that's when it happened. The fear in Elara's eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else. Something cold and absolute. The tear that had been clinging to her lash finally fell, tracing a clean path down her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. Her posture straightened, the hunched shoulders pulled back. The chin lifted. The change was subtle, but the energy around her shifted so dramatically that for the first time, Chad took a half step back. You shouldn't have done that, Elara said. Her voice was different. It wasn't the soft, hesitant whisper they were used to. It was low, clear, and carried an authority that froze them in place. Tiffany recovered first, scoffing. Oh, what? What are you going to do? Read us to death? Elara's eyes locked onto Chad's. She ignored Tiffany completely. You asked me who that is, she said, her voice eerily calm. That is Althea von Hessler. The name hung in the air. It meant nothing to them. Chad snorted. So, she's still dead and ugly. A small, cold smile touched Elara's lips. It was a terrifying expression. The von Hessler family, she continued as if he hadn't spoken, does not own a chain of grocery stores, Chad. They do not run a local car dealership like your father. They do not concern themselves with high school politics or the opinions of small-minded children in a town no one has ever heard of. The bullies exchanged confused, uneasy glances. The script was flipping, and they didn't have the lines. My name, Elara said, bending down and carefully, almost reverently, picking up the photograph, is not Elara Smith. It is Elara von Hessler, and that woman you just insulted was one of the most powerful financial minds of the 20th century. She also had a very, very long memory for insults. Mark, the quiet giant, was the first to feel the true chill of dread. Von Hessler, like the Von Hessler Foundation. Elara's gray eyes flicked to him. So one of you can read. I'm impressed. The Von Hessler Foundation. It was a name you might hear on the news, in segments about global philanthropy, scientific research grants, and multi-billion-dollar charitable trusts. It was a name associated with universities, hospitals, and world leaders. It was not a name associated with a quiet librarian in Cedar Brook. You're lying, Tiffany spat, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The pieces were starting to click into a horrifying picture. The simplicity of Elara's life now looked less like poverty and more like a choice. A very deliberate, very private choice. Why? Chad asked, the word bursting out of him a mixture of anger and confusion. Why are you here? If you're so rich and powerful, why are you here? Elara slid her laptop back into its case. This town, she said, her gaze sweeping over their stunned faces, is the single largest recipient of Von Hessler Foundation grants in the entire state. The new children's wing at the hospital. Us, the technology upgrade for the high school. Us, the revitalization of the town square, the small business loans that kept half the shops on Main Street from closing after the recession. All us, she let that sink in. The man who had been watering his flowers had stopped, his hose dripping onto the pavement, his mouth agape. The woman in the car was openly staring now, her phone forgotten. My family believes in hands-on philanthropy, Elara explained, her tone now that of a teacher addressing slow students. We don't just write checks from a skyscraper in New York. We embed ourselves. We learn the communities we serve. I am here to observe, to understand where the real needs are. My report at the end of this year will determine the Foundation's continued investment in Cedar Brook for the next decade. Chad's face was ashen. The Letterman jacket he wore so proudly suddenly felt like a costume. His father's car dealership had been saved from bankruptcy 2 years ago by a low-interest loan from a local development fund. A fund he was now realizing was seeded by the Von Hessler Foundation. You can't, he stammered. I can't what? Elara asked, her head tilting. I have spent 6 months being invisible. I have listened to you, to your parents, to your teachers, to the mayor. I know who the truly kind people in this town are. The elderly couple who run the soup kitchen. The single mother who works 3 jobs. And I know who the cruel, entitled, and corrupt ones are. Your father, Chad, the beloved town councilman, his creative bookkeeping on the town's infrastructure fund is the subject of a very detailed section in my report. Chad felt the world drop out from under him. And you, Tiffany, Elara continued, her voice softening into something even more dangerous. You're guaranteed scholarship to State University. The one your father, The dean of admissions, engineered by bumping a more deserving student from a poorer family. That is also in my report. That scholarship is funded by a von Hessler endowment. It will be revoked. Tiffany made a small choke sound. You thought you were the predators, Elara said, finally gathering the last of her things and standing tall. She was no longer the mouse. She was the owl, silent, powerful, and seeing everything in the dark. But you were just mice, scurrying at the feet of a giant you were too blind to see. You weren't bullying a nobody. You were insulting the hand that has been feeding your entire town. Elara didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the profound silence she left behind. The bullies didn't move. They were statues of shame and terror, their worldview shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The fallout did not come with sirens or dramatic arrests. It came like a slow, creeping frost. The next day, Chad's father was served with a forensic audit and a lawsuit from the state attorney general's office, prompted by an anonymous tip with impeccable documentation. The Golden Boy's kingdom crumbled overnight. The Letterman jacket was hung up for good, the weight of his family's disgrace too heavy to bear. Tiffany's scholarship vanished. The acceptance letter was replaced with a terse email from the university's ethics committee. Launching an investigation into the admissions department, the social queen found herself dethroned, her friends scattering like leaves in a storm. Mark's family, who owned a local construction company that had won several lucrative town contracts, through their friendship with Chad's father, saw their business dry up. The invisible, economic web that Elara had described was real, and she had just pulled the central thread. The town itself was abuzz with whispers, but they were no longer about the quiet librarian. They were about the von Hessler heiress living in their midst. People looked at their new hospital wing, their kids' new school computers with a new sense of awe and fear. The kindness they had received had not been anonymous. It had been witnessed, and their cruelty had been witnessed too. Elara continued to work at the library, but now when people saw her, they didn't see a nobody. They saw a sovereign. They would nod respectfully, sometimes fearfully. She was polite, as always, but the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. She had not sought revenge in a fairy, dramatic blaze. She had administered justice with the calm, impersonal precision of a surgeon removing a cancer. 2 weeks later, Elara was in the library, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun streaming through the tall windows. The library was empty, quiet. The head librarian, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who had always been gentle with Elara, approached her desk. "There's a car for you, dear," Mrs. said soft. "A black one." "Very fancy." Elara nodded, closing the ledger she was working on. "My year is up, Mrs. Gable. It's time for me to go." "Where to next?" "Somewhere that needs help," Elara replied, offering a genuine, warm smile to the one person in this town who had never looked at her with anything but kindness. "And somewhere, I hope, with a good library." She stood, leaving the key to her desk on the countertop. She walked out of the library for the last time. On the curb idled a sleek, black luxury sedan. A driver stood ready, holding the door open for her. As the car pulled away from the curb, it passed Chad. He was bagging groceries at the local supermarket, his head down, his shoulders slumped. He didn't see the car. He didn't see her. He was just another person, living with the consequences of his actions. Elara didn't even glance in his direction. The past was already behind her. She was looking forward to the next town, the next life, the next set of people who would underestimate the quiet, ordinary woman in their midst. Her story is a devastating reminder that you never, ever know who someone truly is. That the quietest person in the room might be the most powerful. That kindness is a currency, and cruelty is a debt that always, always comes due. She didn't need to scream or fight to win. She just had to be who she was and let the truth do the fighting for her. She was never the victim in that story. She was the judge. And that makes all the difference. Now, I'd love to hear from you. This story of hidden strength and quiet power. From which part of the country are you watching this video? Let me know in the comments below.